firm that started on October 15th, 1978, before most of you were born, almost all of you were born, with 2 lawyers, 2 secretaries, 1 receptionist, 2 typewriters. This is before computers. It was before LexisNexis. It's before e-filing. And to learn about the history, first you have to know about Bill Brockett and me and where we came from. So here's a picture of Bill Brockett. I hope. Yeah, there's Bill. Bill was 3 years older than me. We went to the same high school, Bethesda Chevy Chase, but we didn't know each other because he graduated before I got there. His father was an admiral in the Navy, very distinguished guy. And Bill went to the Naval Academy, planned to make a career of the Navy. He was on swift boats in Vietnam. Think Apocalypse Now, that boat in Apocalypse Now that took Martin Sheen up the river. But Bill ended up hating the war, so he quit the Navy and he went to Yale Law School, where we met. Bill was a real iconoclast and a wonderful person. He had an answer for everything. If you asked him, how long does it take to get over a broken heart? Bill would say 5 years. It's very precise. If you said, when do you begin to get old? 43. He knew everything. And that made him an absolutely fabulous trial lawyer. The other thing that helped his trial lawyer career is that when everybody else worked for law firms in law school, Bill played poker in card clubs in California and made more money than the rest of us. He was a great bike rider before that was so popular in this country. One time he rode from Malaga at the tip of, near Gibraltar to Dublin. And anyway, so we became friends at law school. We had the same mentor, a man named John Ely, who taught it first at Yale, then at Harvard, and then became the dean at Stanford, and unfortunately died very young. So after law school, John Ely sent Bill to the place that he'd started, the Federal Defenders Program in San Diego. And he sent me to work for his judge that he'd clerked for at the time, retired Chief Justice Earl Warren, who still had a clerk and an office at the Supreme Court. And so after clerking, Tina and I and our son Adam came out here to California for my job with the Federal Public Defender, which was just starting. This was a relatively new program. And it was fantastic. I had 30 trials in 2 years. Bill was getting the same kind of experience down in San Diego. After a couple of years as a public defender, I started with 2 other guys, a firm called Kipperman, Shawn, and Keker. We had a great time, although we didn't make any money. And we sued the CIA, we sued the DEA, we sued the California Department of Corrections, we sued the Golden Gate Bridge. We did lots of draft cases, and I learned civil practice from Steve Kipperman, who was a genius. And we had some big cases too. Next slide is I represented Eldridge Cleaver, the Minister of Information of the Black Panther Party. He was quite notorious, and he was charged in a shootout with Oakland cops, from which he had jumped bail, and now he was back, and I represented him in that. And Bill moved to San Francisco in about 1975, worked in the public defender's office for a little bit of time, and then joined us, and it became Kipperman, Shawn, Keker, and Brockett in 1975. And Bill had some big cases for the Alaska Teamsters and for a former U.S. attorney in Alaska who was accused of bringing prostitution and gambling to Valdez at the end of the pipeline. In 1978, October 15, Bill and I broke off and started a practice that I described, 2 secretaries and 2 typewriters, in the top floor of 832 Sansom, which is just up the street from where you are now, right near the corner of Broadway, or where our office is now. And it was an old soy sauce factory, still smelled a little bit like soy sauce. And so we started out there, Keker and Brockett, and had the great advantage that we had is that we knew federal criminal law. And at the time, the big firms all looked down on criminal law and thought it was beneath them. And so they didn't know how to do it. They didn't have anybody there that could do it. And so we lived on referrals from big firms for those first years, for a lot of years, really, referrals from other lawyers. And we were too small to be a threat. We would promise them not to steal their clients. We weren't going to branch out into giving business advice and things like that. So they would send us a case and then keep the client. So that turned out to be a great advantage. And that was lucky. The other lucky thing for us, the biggest stroke of luck, was persuading Bob Van Est in 1979 to join us. Next slide, Amy. Yeah, there you go. There's Bob with his you see that mustache, and you see Bill holding those tapes. We were having a party, and that's the only way you could get music in those days, is carry these tapes. But Bob was clerking for Judge Orrick, not the current Judge Orrick, but his father. Judge Orrick loved Bob and was outraged that Bob would waste his talent on a small brand new firm. And he may have been influenced by the fact that when Judge Orrick first hit the bench, he didn't know anything about criminal law. And he had issued an order in a case that Bill had to identify pre-trial all the witnesses he was going to call in the defense and state whether the defendant was going to testify. And so Bill filed a motion that was quite famous in the courthouse called Notice of Motion and Motion of Intent to Disobey Court Order. Fortunately, Judge Orrick thought that was funny. But anyway, we overcame Judge Orrick's protests, and Bob joined in 1979. He was a tough guy then. I mean, we stretched our budget and thoughts and offered him $19,000 a year, which was, a lot, we thought. And Bob negotiated his way up to $22,000 a year. And anyway, he was a star from the start. He won his first trial, which was a criminal trial in Los Angeles federal court, bird smuggling case of all things. One of our biggest trials together, we had a lot of big ones, good ones, but Seiler versus Lucasfilm. Next slide. Yeah, this was a case where the plaintiff sued 20th Century Fox and Lucasfilm and George Lucas personally, and Joe Johnson, the art director, claiming that the walkers in the Star Wars movies were his copyrighted material and they'd been stolen by Lucas. And George Lucas sat through every bit of our hearing where we showed this guy, next slide, showed this guy to be a complete fraud. There's George back in the old days with Harrison Ford and Luke Skywalker and, the whole crew. And we've been, after that, we did whenever George had a big problem, he would make sure we were hired because he loved that. Next slide, Amy, this early successes and attention got us on the cover of the American Lawyer when it was just starting. And it was when it was a big deal and communicating with lawyers. And that was another lucky thing because that attracted Jeff Channon, who retired this year, but he was another incredibly talented lawyer who has handled our biggest trade secret cases over the years. And then around the time of the American Lawyer cover, we moved to 807. Next slide. 807 Montgomery, which is right up Gold Street. It's a block from our office now. And there's Bill and Bob. Look at that mustache. You gotta love it. And it was, the great thing about that was that it was close to the newly opened Bix. Next slide. And Bix is the bar and dinner club, wonderful place on Gold Street where we still gather to welcome new lawyers when we can gather, and to say goodbye to ones who are moving on, and to celebrate our victories and to mourn our losses. And I just wish we could all do that again soon. And then we got more good publicity in 1984 in the ABA Journal. And here's a picture of all the lawyers in the firm. We at the Old Ship Saloon, which is kitty corner from where we are now. And there you can see we would have meetings and talk about our cases, but everybody could fit around a small table to talk about cases. And then around that time, 1984, we got lucky again, and Susan Harriman joined the firm, and Susan will take it from here. Susan,
I joined the firm on October 1, 1985. I was lawyer number 10 when I joined, and as of today, only John and Bob have been at the firm longer than I have been. That's because Jeff and Winnie retired in December. When I joined, Gary, who's shown in this picture, was the only other associate. There were 8 partners. And Gary quickly became a partner the following January. So for much of my first year, I was the only associate at the firm until Jan joined. At that time, we were hiring just about one lawyer a year. And Jan and I, by the way, we accidentally invented the associates dinner, because one night we were at the firm working and all the partners took off for a partners meeting. They went all off to dinner and to a meeting. And Jan and I turned to each other and said, hey, if they're all going out to dinner, we should go out to dinner. So we walked over to Tommaso's, we had some pizza, went into the office the next day and said to Elaine, one of the partners, by the way, Jan and I, we had an associates dinner. And Elaine said, great, put in the receipt, have the firm pay for it. I was astonished at the time, but that started associates dinners. On my very first day at the office, I was assigned 4 different cases. And I'm just going to tell you quickly about each of them. It was because I thought it was such a great start. The first case was a criminal case that I was doing with John. It was on behalf of a woman who had been charged with bank fraud because she worked for the bank, had an expense account which she was misusing, and she ended up pleading guilty. The other case I did with Bob, it was on behalf of a woman named Susan Teasley. We sued for fiduciary duty, fraud, breach contract. We sued the company that her husband owned and founded, claiming that that company was deliberately undervaluing the shares that she held. She had gotten shares in a divorce, and we believe that they were deliberately tamping down the value of the shares. Bob and I twice trucked up to Sacramento. The case was pending in Sacramento Superior Court, all set to try the case. Both times there was no courtroom available, which used to happen all the time. And in the end, the case settled. I had a case with Bill Brockett, which we called Nuts. When it came in the door, I thought it was going to be so boring. On my first day, and he told me, I need you to get these writs of attachment. It sounded like no fun at all. But as it turns out, the case was just a blast. It had to do with the theft of $6 million worth of pistachio nuts from a warehouse in Philadelphia that were serving as collateral for a loan. We got the writs of attachment over what we thought companies that the debtor owned, property the debtor owned in California. And as it turned out, those properties were owned by a Lichtenstein corporation. They sued, they claimed it was a wrongful attachment, and that was my first trial. It went to trial a year after I started. Bill Brockett let me do the opening statement. We were in trial for 3 weeks. We won completely. It was just a ton of fun. And then the fourth and last case that I had when I started was with John again. It was a potential libel suit. The head of Greenpeace, Dave McTaggart, had come to John and said that Ski Magazine had written an article about him that was libelous. And would we sue Ski Magazine? And John asked me to do an investigation, find out if what was being said was true or false. And lo and behold, what I found out was that everything in the article was true, and we never did sue for libel, truth being a defense. And so I wanted this photo with Gary, the other associate when I started. Gary eventually left us. I think we're both partners by the time of this photo. He eventually left us to be the general counsel of the California Public Utilities Commission. Gary and Jeff Channon were friends since the first grade. And Gary and his wife, then his girlfriend, had the apartment below me my senior year in college. Gary, Jeff Chinnon, and I were all members of the class of 1976 at Brown University. We're all classmates. And I wanted to use this photo just to demonstrate something that I found sort of unique and interesting about the firm when I started, which is that we believed in having friends and family join the firm. We believed that it was good if your friends would come or your family members would come. After all, John and Bill had been best friends at Yale Law School. So if we go, Amy, to the next photo, this photo kind of underscores that point. So with the kind of bushy hair and gold shirt in the middle, that's me. This was taken at a Christmas party on a ferry boat. We used to have this wonderful tradition of holiday parties and summer gatherings and all that stuff pre-COVID. And this ferry boat was a place where we were considering putting our office and didn't. But this is the Christmas party. Right above my shoulder to the right is Jorge. And Jorge's sister, Mercy, was the very first clerk that we hired back in August of 1986. Mercy stayed with us for several years, left, came back in 2005 to head our billing, and she still is in charge of our billing department. And Jorge and Mercy's brother, Rick, who's on the call, joined us when he got out of the Army. He was in the Army, served in the Gulf War, and joined us when he left. Just behind Jorge is, a little bit to the left, is Winnie. Winnie, who just retired in December after 36 years with us as head of our accounting department. Not in the photo is her sister, Vivian, who has worked with us in the accounting department for 33 years. And just next to Winnie is Diana Mills, who's still a receptionist, has been with us since 1986. And next to Diana is her sister, Monica Mills, who was with us for a long time, was Bob's secretary for years, was briefly an office manager. And then I should just briefly mention Maria Canales Benson Dita over to the side, because Maria has been with us for over 32 years. So this kind of shows that the Porto sisters, Anne and Catherine, won't be the first siblings to be working for us. They're following a long tradition. But I also think it's fair to say that the longevity of our employees is a wonderful testament to the warmth and the collegiality that we enjoy and we cherish at the firm. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jan.
Thanks, Susan. I joined Keker and Brockett at the end of 1986, a year after Susan. The firm was 8 years old at that point. I was lawyer number 11. I was the firm's first lateral hire, and I was also the first former prosecutor the firm hired, something that gave John a lot of heartburn when I was being interviewed, but he bit his tongue and I got the job and I'm still here. I learned of the firm, actually not from John, but from through a law professor of mine who was friends with Bill Brockett. They were both in the Navy together. And Bill was really very influential to me in my early years at the firm. My very first case, Susan talked about her first cases. My first case was representing one of Bill's clients, the Daphne family, which ran a bunch of mortuaries and a cemetery, and they were in trouble for mishandling human remains. So that was kind of a shock to start working on that as my first case. The lawyer on the other side was Melvin Belli, who was a famed tort lawyer, plaintiff's lawyer, whose office was down the street. And in fact, Mel Belli, whenever he would win a case, he would hoist a pirate flag up above his office up on the roof on Montgomery Street. And we've sort of adopted that tradition with our email virtual pirate flag whenever we have a good result. My first two trials at the firm were with Bill Brockett. They were both criminal cases, both of which we prevailed. I remember in one trial, Bill was arguing some very arcane evidentiary point, and he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a book and said, "Your Honor, this learned treatise here says at page 38 that, you know, I can do this. This piece of evidence is admissible." And he showed the book to the prosecutor, Ben Burt, who's now a judge over in Contra Costa County. And Ben looked at it and said, "Well, yeah, it does say that. And I guess I'll withdraw my objection." Bill put the book away. The book was written by John Keker and Bill Brockett, effective direct and cross-examination. which we have copies in our library, and it's a great book, and I recommend you new lawyers, you should take a look at it. The next year, 1987, was a big year for the firm. John Keker was chosen to work with independent counsel Lawrence Walsh in the investigation and prosecution of Oliver North, who you'll recall was a member of the National Security Council under Ronald Reagan and was involved in facilitating arms sales to Iran in violation of US law as a means to covertly funnel money to Nicaragua to support the Contras, who are opposing the Nicaraguan socialist government, the Iran-Contra affair. So John was basically gone in DC through 1987 and 1988 and through the trial in 1989. And also around this time, Bill Brockett decided to go half-time in his profession. So this was a very challenging time for our firm. I was starting to scratch my head, like, what have I gotten myself into? I mean, the firm was 10 years old, and John Keker and Bill Brockett were sort of absent. And Bob Van Nest stepped up and began showing what an incredible talent he was and what a leader in the firm he would be. And actually, I would say we all stepped up and we sort of proved that we were a firm. We were more together than just John and Bob, the name Salvador. The North case really showcased John's. The North case showcased John's talent as an incredible trial lawyer and showcased it on a national stage. It really was what put him on the map as a nationally known trial lawyer. It also showcased his contrarian nature. There were a lot of people in this country that did not think Oliver North should be prosecuted. They thought he was a hero. And it was a somewhat unpopular case for John to take on. And I want to show you all a clip of a speech that John gave in 1989 after the trial was over, about 32 years ago, before many of you were born.
I was I don't know about internationally known, Ruth, but I was the prosecutor in the Oliver North case. I considered it to be a great honor. Not everybody considered it to be a great honor. I can assure you of that. I wish I'd kept my mail. The one that I remember most fondly was a letter from somebody comparing me with the great traitors in history and listing them. Judas Iscariot, of course, was first. Benedict Arnold was second. And then lastly, Tom Hayden and Jane Fonda. And I kept saying to myself what Chief Justice Earl Warren used to say, which is that everything I ever did in my life that was worthwhile, I caught hell for.
And our firm is still doing cases that we catch hell for, including suing President Trump many times over the last 4 years and fighting for justice on behalf of our clients in a number of sometimes unpopular cases. 1989 was also a big year for the Bay Area generally. We had the Bay Bridge World Series, the A's against the Giants, with a major earthquake at the beginning of Game 3. Our firm was still in the brick building over at 807 Montgomery. I was actually at the World Series game, but I was told the people that were in the office at 807 were hanging on as the brick building rocked and swayed with the earthquake. And then after it was over, people ran over to 710 Sansom. The office we were about to move into to make sure that it was still standing, which thankfully it was. And a month later, we did, in 1989, move to 710 Sansom. Jorge's going to talk about that. And Elliot's going to talk a little bit about the 1990s, but I want to just close by saying that the best thing I did in the 1990s is have 3 children while also continuing to try big cases. My son Robert was born in 1991. And then Amy, you can show the next slide. In 1995, John and I tried the Patrick Hallinan case, and you can see my big belly there. I was quite pregnant. I went from 5 months to 7 months pregnant during that trial. And then a year and a half later, I was pregnant with my 3rd child, and John and I were working on a criminal case in Las Vegas representing Silver State Disposal, the garbage company. And I'll never forget our client taking us very proudly to the Silver State transfer station, which is this giant pit indoors where all the garbage trucks come and dump all their garbage. And the smell was just unbelievable for a pregnant woman, but I managed to keep it together. Then after that, John had to go off to Los Angeles to try the Big Oil antitrust case, and I had to take over the Silver State case for that trial with 3 kids at home, aged 6 and 2 and 8 months. And I want to talk about this because It seems normal now to be a mother and a busy trial lawyer, and we have many of them in our firm. But 30 years ago, when I was doing it, it was not normal. And our firm, I'm so proud, our firm was really at the forefront of supporting our lawyers, men and women, who were raising families while still doing really top quality trial work. And Susan talked a lot about family. I should just mention that the main reason I was able to do my job while having kids at home is I had the best childcare provider in the world, Olivia Leva, who of course is the mom of Mercy, Rick, and Jorge. So they've been part of my family for many, many years. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jorge.
Great. Thank you, Jan. Appreciate that. As the only non-attorney in this presentation, my journey has definitely been different. I started at KVP in 1989, right out of high school. I was working part-time as a clerk and putting myself through college. Among other duties, they had three main responsibilities: file time slips, copy cases from law books, and feed the birds. I've been very fortunate to see this firm grow over the past 30 years, and it has been a fascinating journey, to say the least. Shortly after we were rattled by the '89 quake, we moved from 807 Montgomery to 710 Sansom. We probably doubled or tripled our square footage, and I think it was the first time we needed a floor plan to find everyone's location. All our secretaries had typewriters, and we thought that 5¼ inch floppy disk was the greatest invention in the world. As time progressed, I became involved in our expansion projects, and it didn't take long before we outgrew 710 Sansom. In '91, we expanded to the 6th floor of 615 Battery, where I believe Chris, Carney, and Elliot moved shortly after starting at the firm. In 1994, we left 615 6th floor and moved to 633 Battery, 4th floor. To facilitate the foot traffic between both buildings, we installed a bridge between the two and made it easier for us to get back and forth. It even had a little blue canopy, as you can see, for those rainy days, but the maintenance on that steel was incredibly challenging. In 1997, we expanded to 633 Battery, 3rd floor, and installed the first of many interconnecting stairs in that building. The following year, I graduated from college with a degree in international business, but I was enjoying the work, the projects, the culture that I decided to stay at the firm. I never, ever expected it to turn into a career. Here I am, still here. In 2001, 2002, we expanded to the northwest wing of the 633 6th floor, where Elliot had the northwest corner office, where he is still today. That skylight was so bright that we gave Elliot a pair of shades. As our company grew, so did our departments. In 2002, we moved our file room from 633 4th floor to Suite 120 in the Breezeway, which became our official record center. On that same year, we built out Suite 103, which was formerly occupied by Wells Fargo Bank and Eileen West. Working with a talented team, Suite 103 was transformed to a beautiful, bright, bamboo trim paralegal space. How many law firms can say they have a bank vault in their office? And of course, it was just simply too expensive to move it, so we just left it alone. Over the next few years, we expanded to other parts of the building. Our firm was growing rapidly and successfully, but the growth came with challenges. We were used to being a tightly knitted family, but the physical distance from each other was hard, and we felt a bit disconnected. So it meant we needed to make stronger efforts to maintain the special bond that had been cultivated by our founding partners. We began with bowling night, followed by the popular staff versus attorneys softball game, the JP Morgan 5K, and our in-house events such as staff appreciation lunch, the Halloween party, and our holiday luncheon. It's hard to keep a growing family together, but we definitely try, and it's an ongoing effort. In 2008, we built out the rest of the 6th floor, the 633 6th floor, which was when Bob in our accounting department left 710 Sansom building. Since Bob had a skylight in his old conference room at 710 Sansom, well, we just added a new skylight in his new conference room at 633 Battery. You know, it's awesome to be on the top floor, but not so much when we experience roof leaks. In 2011, I wore a hard hat to work every day. It was extremely busy year. We worked on 3 separate floors simultaneously. First, we remodeled and expanded a 633 fourth floor lunchroom and the adjacent conference rooms. We even removed a structural column in the drums conference room, which is a very scary task even for our structural engineer. Next, we expanded to the rest of the 5th floor and we built a state-of-the-art conference center on the ground floor. Finally, we moved our reception from 710 Sansom to the newly remodeled 633 Battery Lobby. And after 22 years of memories, we said goodbye to the 710 Sansom building. The following year, we expanded to 615 Battery 4th and 5th floors. Sometimes we even make adjustments as our workflow and facility needs change. In the past 10 years, we built out the Rico Business Center, locker room, gym, and yoga room in the basement level. We also converted a reception desk at 633 4th floor to a coffee bar. I don't know about you, but I sure do miss those lattes. And in 2018, with the expansion to the 633 2nd floor, we officially have office space on every floor at 633 Battery. You know, it has been a phenomenal experience to see this firm grow from a 10,000 square foot office at 807 Montgomery to a 120,000 square foot powerhouse that we are today. I've been very fortunate to work in the expansion and construction team with Jeff Channon, who has been at the helm of our real estate expansions, Chris Carney, Steve Taylor, George Sharton, and Steve McHugh. Working closely with our contractors and our architects, we have an opportunity to create something special that is specifically designed for the way we work at KVP. You know, it makes me sad that our new associates and staff members do not get to enjoy our office facility and walk the hallways that are beautifully decorated by our awesome art committee with artwork from artists from all walks of life. I truly believe that we have something very special at our firm, and I am incredibly grateful to be part of the KVP family. And now we'll hear from someone that taught me a long time ago about our dedication and commitment to our clients, Elliot Peters.
Thank you, Jorge. That's terrific. I met the lawyers of Keker and Brockett for the first time in 1986 when I was a law clerk, and I interviewed. I was offered a job, and I turned them down in favor of becoming an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. And I said to John Keker, do you think there's any chance that you guys might be interested in me in 4 or 5 years after I've tried a lot of cases? Because there's no other firm that I've ever interviewed with or met that I like as much as this firm. And he said, no, I don't think so. I don't really like prosecutors. And I had the same conversation with Bob Van Est. I said, is there any chance you'd be interested in me in a couple of years? And he said, no, Elliot, I don't think so. And that was that, until I did contact them in 1991. And the firm had decided to grow. And I'm very grateful that they decided to make me an offer at that point in time. And I joined the firm in December of 1991. And although I joined Keker and Brockett, it was just a few months after that the firm became Keker, Brockett, and Van Est in recognition of Bob's incredible contributions to the firm. I had never tried a case as a defense lawyer or handled an appeal as a defense lawyer, and most of my background was in criminal work, but I got my feet wet in a hurry at the firm. The first case I ever tried as a defense lawyer, can we see the next slide, Amy? Was a case where I represented a lawyer who was accused of basically cheating his clients in federal court in Sacramento. And unfortunately, his name was Stuart Crimes. Fortunately for Stuart, he wasn't convicted of any crimes. He was acquitted. But it was during the jury selection of that trial that I called the office from the payphone in the hallway outside the courtroom. And the receptionist, who I think was Diana, actually on the phone at that point, said to me, John Keker wants to speak to you. And I said, I'm really in a hurry, but okay, put John on. So John got on the phone to tell me that morning the partnership had met and decided that they would elevate Chris Carney, myself, and Karen Kramer to become partners. And that was at the end of 1993, even though we were on a longer partnership track than that. So I was very excited. I was very happy. But I also did say to John, well, that's great, John, but I got to go back and finish picking this jury. Um, After that, I had a bunch more criminal cases in the early part of my career at the firm. I tried a case in Minneapolis with John. Can we go to the next slide, Amy? I'm sorry. That's the recorder about the story about Chris and Karen, myself making partner, and down at the bottom, the story about how I called from the payphone and had to go back and pick the jury. You see the next slide, please. I tried a case in 1995 with John in Minneapolis, and it was during this trial that John learned that Bill Bill Brockett had a stroke. He left the trial, went back to San Francisco, left me there alone for a while in Minneapolis, but eventually that client of ours was acquitted also in that criminal case, and that helped develop the relationship we still have today with Genentech. Can I see the next slide? I also did a case with Bill Brockett, which was known as the Fruit case in the Eastern District. We represented a guy named Michael Thomas who had been convicted in court, and we won that case in the Ninth Circuit. I love this because my co-counsel on the appeal was Jeb Boasberg, James E. Boasberg, now a federal judge in DC. And then we also, can we see the next slide too? We also had the good fortune of trying and the Ruggs case, which is an incredible story up in Tacoma. We represented these rug dealers who were accused of smuggling $8 million worth of Persian carpets. And although we lost that case at trial, we got it reversed on appeal also. And then of course the clients couldn't pay for that, so they paid us with a lot of rugs, and people have heard that story before. With the help of John, who introduced me to a case with Fulbright and Jaworski, can we see the next slide? Over the years, and much to my surprise, we developed an extraordinary practice representing law firms. Susan has done a lot of that work, and so have I. And we have had, this is just sort of a partial list of some of the big firms that we've represented, but it's always been a point of pride that a lot of these big firms, when they needed counsel and they had a problem in California, they would contact us. And that's true today. And can we see the next slide, please, Amy? The same was true in criminal cases. We represented Bill Larac, who was a very well-known and kind of notorious securities lawyer in connection with a criminal case. The investigation went on for a number of years. Ultimately, Bill Larac pled guilty and went to jail, but it was a fascinating case, and just another example of kind of a case of national significance that was attracted to our little firm because of the talent and reputation of John Keker that I got to work on. And at the same time, we were doing the Enron case, and Jan and I agreed, well, Jan, you do Fastow, I'll do Larac. And then we made a similar deal later on with Frank Quattrone. Can we see the next slide? Frank Quattrone was tried in New York on one of the most bullshit cases I've ever seen or heard about, but it was really tricky. It was incredibly high profile at the time because he was like the most successful investment banker in the country. And I tried the first case with John on behalf of Frank. That's why you see me in that photo on the left. But I was also a parent. I am also a parent. And at this particular moment in my life, I was a single parent. And I needed to be here for my three kids. And when there was the jury hung and there was a retrial, I just couldn't go back to New York and retry the case. So Jan, in an incredible display of generosity and the kind of way our partnership works, Jan stepped in and tried the second case for Frank Quattrone with John. I think it made, and then ultimately Frank was convicted in that second trial, but won the case on appeal. Also over the years, we have had, can I see the next slide too? We have had the incredible honor and good fortune of doing some wonderful pro bono work, which I'm tremendously proud of. Here's the team that freed John Tennyson. John is the brother of Bruce Tennyson that works in the parking lot next door to our office. Those of you will get to know Bruce when we get back to the office, but there's the team: Dan Purcell, Ethan Ballo, Stacy Wexler, who's now a senior lawyer at Google. This is 2 days after John got out of prison. He was serving 14 years to life. And next slide, please. Here's Joe Golub and Reed Mullen, who had a huge role in freeing Ronald Ross Here's Ronald Ross. After Ronald got out, he was serving a life sentence in California for an attempted murder he didn't commit. Next picture is great, please. Over the years, although we've had as little management as possible, we've had great management. And for those of you who don't know, but the story of the sweater and the sweater conference room, Chris Carney was our managing partner for many, many years, kind of created the role, did an absolutely fabulous job. And then when it came time to hang up his sweater, he did so and passed on that responsibility to Steve Taylor, who has taken it from there, developed the role, and done just an outstanding job managing the firm. And it's so important to the way we operate that we sacrifice a great lawyer in Steve, having him run the firm, but boy, our firm is really well managed thanks to his efforts and Joy's efforts. We've also made a bunch of judges. We didn't make them, they became judges, but we're extremely proud that as we've grown, Brian Farrell, who we recently lost, John Streeter, John Tiger, Vince Chabria, Yumi Lee, and Jeb Boasberg, who I mentioned earlier, who's a judge in DC. Those are our alumni who are judges. And needless to say, in this 30-year journey that I've had at this firm, there was no prouder day for me, or more meaningful day for me, than the day that my partners and the firm decided to put my name on the door alongside John Keker and Bob Van Ness' name. I always feel that my name doesn't belong there, but I try my hardest to contribute as much as I can to keep this firm going into the future. And with that, I want to turn it over to Bob Van Ness.
Thanks, Elliot. Hi, guys. It's great to see everybody. And thank you guys for joining us and hanging in as we revisit the past. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about a big practice area for us today, IP practice, which, as John previewed, didn't exist back when we got started. Not only did we not have computers, not only did we not have GPS, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have any of that, but Google didn't exist, Facebook didn't exist, Netflix didn't exist. And so back then, IP practice, John talked about the big firms looking down their noses at criminal law. Well, we looked down our nose at IP practice then. It was done by a bunch of specialists. We called them patent geeks. They never went to trial. It was an office practice. And John will be the first to admit we looked down on it until suddenly overnight, they needed us. Then it became a great thing because back then there weren't really trial lawyers doing IP work. And we broke in with Intel back in the 1980s. That was our first big IP client and one of our best clients for almost 25 years. And John and I got started with Intel based on the 386. And we called it the holy water license because the arbitrator sprinkled holy water on it. And of course, I still have the holy water here in the office. Well, Intel made a bonus deal with us, one of our first bonus deals. They said, if you can get this holy water license eliminated, we'll pay you and John a bonus at any level for any amount of time because it will shatter AMD's ability to compete. Well, we lost in the Superior Court, no bonus. We won in the Court of Appeal, won a bonus. Big bonus for us at the time. John, I think it was 50 grand. Yeah. Then we went to the Supreme Court, and I got to argue in the Supreme Court, and we thought we were going to win. We counted the heads, and at the last minute, Justice Pinelli was replaced by Matt Werdiger's mother, Kay Werdiger, who voted against us, and we lost the case. Intel versus AMD, look it up. It's a big deal. But it meant that we had landed in IP and we had Intel as our first big IP client. And for many years, we were an Intel client until we started working with Qualcomm. Now, in those days, patent cases were few and far between. This was a great one that John and Jeff did for Ventratex. They did it with Henry Bunso, who was then at Brobeck. It was a big deal in the legal biz. They won the case. It was a trial. It was a trade secret case. And that's how we met Henry Bunso, who came to the firm in the mid-90s and kind of gave us some street cred as IP lawyers. And we continued to build on really small, I don't want to say chicken shit, but any good practice starts small, and we certainly started small. We had a lot of cases that were nickel and dime. The next one is a good example. They called this high tech, the sonic tracker. The sonic tracker sat on a paver and sent a signal, just like a sonogram, down to a string line so the road could be paved smooth. We thought that was the greatest thing and some of the best technology ever. Today, this is all done by GPS, but we won that case. We got a great settlement. AgTech got bought by Topcon, and Topcon's been a great IP client for many years, but it all started off with the sonic tracker. A couple of years after that, Henry and John Tiger and I went to Oregon on behalf of a small inventor, a family that invented a device to make car batteries. Again, we thought this was so high tech, so wonderful. Well, we ran into Judge Haggerty in Portland, who threw out 90% of the case, but we tried the last 10%. We said, okay, Judge, you don't think the device is that great? There's a little feeder on this thing, and we've got a claim on the feeder. And the judge was skeptical, but he let us try it, and we won a $7 million verdict for this family, which doesn't seem like much today. Ho-hum, 7 mil, but at that time, it was the largest plaintiff's IP verdict in the state of Oregon. So turning forward to 2001, this was the very last case that John Keker and I ever tried together, and boy, did we have fun. We camped out at the Fairmont in San Jose. We had Brian Farrell as our lead associate, and maybe he was a young partner then. The two heavyweights in the industry. We were paired against Jim Brosnahan and Jim Bennett from MoFo, and it was a case involving field programmable gate arrays. Finally, something that was actually tech. And it was in the papers every single day. It went to trial. We won the trial. It was a huge victory. You can see us here celebrating in the office. And then, unfortunately, the judge, Jim Ware, I never figured out why he did this, took the verdict away on a chicken shit motion by Altera. And we had to settle the case for what I consider peanuts, but we did settle the case. It was taken away. But this one really helped put us on the map. John and I had a blast together. We had a whole floor at the Fairmont, and it was good living and a lot of fun. And beating up on Jim Brosnahan and Jim Bennett, that was even better. And so that was Ilex and Altera back in 2001. Shortly after that, Jeff Channon, Brian, Ashok, and Warren captured a huge trade secret win in Alameda County. They bottled up the Intel of China, SMIC, the manufacturing, integrated semiconductor manufacturing of China, had stolen trade secrets from TSMC, our longtime client. SMIC was astonished. How could we have to go to trial in a tiny little courtroom in Alameda County? Very fortunately for us, one of our great friends, Steve Brick, was the trial lawyer, the trial judge. Jeff, Ashok, Brian, Warren, the team tried it. They won a huge verdict, and everybody celebrated. They got an injunction as part of the jury verdict, and then SMIC violated the injunction. We tried it again and won an even bigger settlement. This was hundreds of millions of dollars when it all ended up. And that was a great, great win for us. And again, put us really up in the upper levels of IP. Well, we've taken that and we've turned it into a great, great practice. You guys all know Google and Oracle. Look at this great team. That was the team that tried the first case. We won this case twice. The first time we beat MoFo and the inimitable David Boys. We hung the jury in a case where Google admitted taking 37 packages of Java APIs and thousands of lines of code. We had a fair use defense. The jury hung. We considered that a big victory against the $9 billion claim. That went up on appeal and was reversed. We tried fair use and won a fair use case back in 2016. Now that was taken away by the Federal Circuit, and now we're in the U.S. Supreme Court sitting on pins and needles waiting for a result. That was argued in October. And as all you guys know, we're expecting a result any day now from the Supreme Court. But I'm very proud of the team that we had. And that most of that team tried the second case too. And that was back in 2016. What a wonderful, wonderful win that was. And in that same year in December, a different team won a great case against Quinn Emanuel, our arch enemies, and Cisco, which was trying to beat up on a small startup, Arista. And Arista had some wonderful people. They had a better product, but they were getting beaten down by Cisco. They were using technology interfaces that Cisco all of a sudden claimed were theirs. And so, but before that, we'd considered it open source, available for anybody to use. So of course we had our executives on tape saying, hey, we copied the Cisco CLI, we copied it slavishly, it's been a big advantage and benefit. But we went to trial again for the little guy, and we won. Now this team photo here is great, but it's missing some really important team members who were associates then. Lizzie McCloskey was on that team. Ryan Wong was on that team. David Rosen was on that team. And I'm sorry, guys, we should have included the associates in this picture, but there you go. There were the partners. And, you know, there's nothing like winning to help your practice grow. We've been very fortunate to be in the Bay Area where all these great tech companies have grown up. We've been very fortunate to be selected by them to be their counsel. And then we've been very fortunate to keep winning good, big IP cases. And so I'm very proud of the IP practice that we've built up. And I think that's the roundup, Amy. Is there anything else we want to mention? Let's go to the last slide, our beautiful, beautiful new office with a mural that was John and Tina's idea, I think, and it came out so well. And the funniest thing about this mural is that we kept saying to the artist, hey, wait a minute, we're in San Francisco. We got to have the Golden Gate Bridge in this thing. What? You can't have a mural about San Francisco. He kept saying, no, everybody does that. Well, up there in the upper right-hand corner, John finally persuaded him to stick the Golden Gate Bridge in there. And by God, there it is. barely made it. And we're very proud of having that mural. It's basically on the city tour now. When they do the walking tours, which they will again, you'll see groups of people out in the front taking a look and put it on the tour. So that's the recap, guys. John, Amy, do we have time for questions, or is that a wrap?
We've got a few minutes we've got 5 minutes to go. But first, let me just thank all the presenters for wonderful, wonderful job and walk down memory lane. That was just terrific, I thought.